Welcome to another Founder Wisdom Pod. We have Jon Reed with us. He's co-founder at diginomica.com. He's an enterprise irregular purveyor of multimedia content. He's constantly debunking and researching what matters to B2B buyers. This podcast is brought to you by podpair.com. If you want to scale, start, or monetize a podcast, you can go to podpair.com. It is also brought to you by Qualia Mind. If you want to optimize your brain, have better focus, memory, and drive, you can go to neurohacker.com/CO wisdom. Jon, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself and what you're up to nowadays.
So, when you reached out to me to do this, you said you want to interview people with ambition. So my ambition is to give you the most brutally honest podcast you've done. So we see how we do.
Yeah.
I'm in my mid 50s now. I think I've achieved a lot of my dreams, but I've also made some pretty big mistakes. I'm always curious how much you can avoid mistakes versus just have to live through them yourself. But for the purposes of our podcast today, I'm going to pretend like maybe there's a few things I've learned that could spare some of your listeners some turmoil. Shall we see?
Yeah. But let's start with your defeats and hard lessons that you've learned. I think these are really super interesting, and there's always a lesson from these. So tell me about, the past 20, 30 years that you've been in business and what you've learned. What were your brutal failures and the learnings from
Okay.
these?
Okay. Well, so I think there were some interesting ones. Sometimes my successes were my toughest failures. So I'll give you one example. Uh, Early in my career, I made a good amount of money building a .com. And I assumed that the success was me, but it was more the market. I built up a lot of money, became a real estate investor, and made some money in real estate. And I thought I was a pretty cool guy. And then September 11th came, everything crashed down, and I was a little bit exposed. And the other problem was this, Charles, which is I think we have to find an interesting balance between what we're good at, which is talent, what we're passionate about, and what the market wants. These things are separate, and sometimes beautifully they overlap. So for example, like in the real estate, I really made some good money, but I didn't like it. And I had to sit back to myself and say, man, I could be this successful guy, but I didn't enjoy it. And it turns out my passions weren't as marketable. But eventually I realized I'm going to make them marketable. And so this was one of my big early hard lessons. But there's more. That's just one. I don't want to rattle them all off.
Okay. And what was your passion in the end?
Creating content, building web communities, reaching audiences in new ways. Nothing got me more excited than putting out content that I really cared about and having someone halfway across the world respond to it and say this resonates. And like I was like, this feels like it matters. But unfortunately, it didn't always matter. Like, for example, I built a community around my music journalism and I totally failed. I couldn't monetize it. I was passionate about it, but I just couldn't make it work. So that was really tough. But eventually what I realized is that there are niche communities that you can market to. And the beauty of the web is that you could figure out how to do that and reach people. And I knew I wasn't going to build some big company because one of my other really tough lessons was having the rug pulled out from under me by venture capital. And now look, venture capital is an important part of the options for any CEO. But for me, I had a really bad experience and I became very committed to bootstrapping. But bootstrapping has its challenges too. So that was one of my other early failures was bad experience with venture capital when I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah, and bootstrapping is the way to go, in my opinion. Do you think that VC money is going to scale in the age of AI when you can build a profitable prototype in 3 days?
It's a really good question. I mean, look, I'm not going to rule out all VC investment for anyone. I would never do that, but I do think if you place a high value on autonomy and stuff like that, one of the really tough things about VCs is that you start to run out of runway and the expectations for return are intense. So, for example, in the case of Diginomica, one of the reasons I think why we have succeeded is because we didn't take VC money because most of the media companies that took VC money ran out of runway because the media business is tough and if you have that kind of return pressure, then it kind of sucks. And also the other thing is that like when you have VCs, they often want to go with the big thing and they want the mass market thing that's going to be the next, Amazon or the next eBay or whatever. And they're not very interested in cool niche offerings. But to me, the niche is often where the joy is found. And it really depends on who you are. If you're Bill Gates, then you want a mass market. But some people just really want to hammer a niche and be, you said about ambition. Like my ambition was always to try to be the best in the world at what I did. And so I wanted a niche.
Right. And what is your niche? Who is your ICP and what do you offer to them with Diginomica nowadays?
So that's a really good question. I mean, I think a lot of times my niche has evolved a bit, but it has to do with helping enterprise software decision makers avoid project failures, have more product successes, and also help individuals in that arena become successful experts and not to fail as well. And so trying to identify the patterns of failure versus success in the enterprise has sort of been the passion. And of course we analyze a lot of software companies and things like that, and we look at the impact of AI on work. And obviously the impact of AI is very profound. But at the same time, I feel in many ways we are losing track in the AI sort of noise of what makes our human creators special. And ultimately, there needs to be kind of a fusing of the two. And unfortunately, we're losing track of that a little bit right now.
Right. And tell me about these other stinging failures of yours and what lessons you've learned. Let's dive into some more of them.
You like the failures, huh? Oh, okay. Let's see. Some more failures. Well, let's see. One of them was not really so much a failure, but it was when I realized like early on when I was building these .coms, I went to a conference and I went to a conference with a bunch of executives and they were all salespeople. And I realized like, oh my God, they are so much better at selling than I'm ever going to be. Charles, you seem like a pretty good salesperson, so you probably have these skills. But like, I don't know, you're probably the kind of person that can walk into a room of strangers and like within like 5 minutes, you have a bunch of them standing around you laughing and like you're handing out business cards and stuff. Like I suck at that. Like I'm good at building deeper relationships, but I'm not a good natural salesperson. And when I got back from that conference, I was so discouraged. And I was like, how can I make it in this industry? Because when you're around people who are so much better than you at something, like I wanted to be a guitarist. That was my first dream until I played with other musicians that were so much better than me. And I was like, oh. And so that was a real tough one. And then I was like, I proposed to the owner of the firm. I said, let's build websites and content because I can write. And so that's kind of what happened was I was like, I can't compete on these terms. I have to change the playing field for something that I can compete on. And I've always been a writer. And so I was like, I can do this. And that's how these web communities we built were born. And it was more out of desperation. It wasn't like that I was some brilliant guy that saw the power of web communities and web commerce and stuff like that. I just had no other choice. I was up against the wall. I was basically living on full commission at that point. And if I didn't start making deals, I was no longer going to be an entrepreneur. I was going to have to get a 9 to 5 somewhere. And I literally was out of time at 1 year in, and I had 3 deals. They all had to come in. And if they came in, I could keep working. And they all came in. And at that point, I was like, oh my God, now I'm going to write. I'm going to do this. And we built up these big newsletter audiences. And so it paid off. But I first had to confront what I wasn't good at.
Right. On my side, I think, not definitely not the type to enter a room with one business cards. I think these are dumb and
Yeah,
like take the attention of everyone because I'm no attention whore. But yeah, I'm all about like thinking. I'm really good at thinking. I have massive brain power and I can think of great offers that people would want, right? And
right.
in the end, that's what sales is about. It's about adding value and being all about the other person. I definitely have a good skill for that. So yeah, like great salespeople, I think they're great question askers. They're great thinkers as well. They're
Right.
great problem solvers, which is pretty much the same skills it takes to launch a business. But yeah, interesting points that you've made. I'm checking Diginomica right now, and do you feel that SEO is still a thing? Do you think it will scale with tools like ChatGPT that do a 3x better job than Google at providing you what you want?
It's an important question, and I would say that websites are a little bit threatened by the new SEO, which is really about, the Googles of the world and the Microsoft Bings. They want to keep people on their page. Now, one thing I will point out to you is a lot of those search results are shit. They're not good results, and they're not always accurate. And so the value of the classic web was that you got to see a bunch of links and choose what you thought was the best information. The AI is now going to try to give you the best information, and sometimes it's good, but sometimes it's just not what you need. And so I'm not sure where this will all land, but what I would say is that SEO is definitely changing, and the role of a website changes also. But the thing is that this has been changing for a long time. This isn't like one technical shift. You could go back 15 years ago and destination websites were a really big deal. Now, a lot of your audience when you're a business, they congregate on large platforms, whether it's TikTok or LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook. And so you have to strike a balance between being where your customers congregate versus building your own assets online. But I continue to believe that you do need to have some assets that you own and control where you can acquire opt in data from your prospects. And the thing is that if you only excel on, say, LinkedIn or Instagram, you're basically beholden to algorithmic changes on that platform, and that can be very tough. I don't know if you've experienced this, but I did on YouTube. We can add this to my failures. I had a pretty successful B2B YouTube channel some years ago with thousands of views, and I got wiped out by the YouTube algorithm changes and never recovered. And so, if my business had been totally dependent on YouTube, I would have been screwed.
Right. Yeah, I'm seeing on X, for example, I'm shadow banned. It seems I'm not even popping the search. I'm
There you
not sure
go.
why. Um, YouTube has been pretty nice so far. I think I've got like one strike as a publisher so far from, I think, some video that I put out for COVID back in these days. So I had a COVID strike, but yeah, generally like diversify yourself. One platform I'm quite bullish about, obviously, is cold email. Like no one has control over that.
Right.
Google is trying, but yeah, that's still somewhere where you can get like full independence and not being quote unquote banned. I'm also looking at your website, and yeah, for the last specs, it can be quite fun as well if your landing page loads quick, and you have features such as dyslexia mode. That's quite interesting. Tell me a bit more about that one.
So I'm surprised more sites haven't pursued it because it's actually not that hard to do. But we partnered with our development firm Brainsome to essentially put a dyslexic friendly font as an option on our articles. And one of the big things for us as a business that I think should be good for all businesses is be as accessible as possible and allow your content to be consumed in as many ways as possible. So we put our site to the screen reader test as well. Wants people on screen readers. We have audio versions of our articles, and like you said, we have dyslexic mode. Um, I mean, the thing is when you make your content accessible, you give people choice, and the choice of consumption is big right now. Whether it's multimedia and text, it's like do it all and do it in as many formats as you can to make it friendly for people. And we've had a lot of great responses to that. And you can also see from our site, there's not a bunch of bullshit autoplay videos coming up and stuff like that. And we really focus on fast page loads, mobile friendly, and a really good reading experience for our audience without the usual ad tech crap that makes it so hard. If you go on a typical tech site, you're going to have pop-up stuff all over the place. So we want to make a better experience, and that's part of trust. I mean, basically in the age of AI, the way you respond to that is by building trusted communities and people who want to share their data and information with you. And so that's our goal.
And you seem big on diversity as well. Tell me your stance on diversity and why it matters to you.
Well, I think I'm not really ideological about it. I just think that in this world there's a lot of people with a lot of different capabilities, and it's not just a race gender thing. It's neuro capabilities, different kinds of economic backgrounds. I just believe that everyone sort of deserves a chance, basically. And then what you find in the enterprise world in general, and what I have found, is that the more people from different perspectives that gather around a table together when they're working on projects, the better those projects are going to come out. And it's a huge issue in the age of AI, because AI tends to get trained on data that is more reflecting one demographic and one point of view. And the goal with a more diverse constituent group is to create technology that serves everybody, not just the elite. So I look at it not from an ideological point of view, but more a practical point of view, that the more different points of view that you reckon with, the better your projects are going to come out.
Right. And what do you foresee it in the podcasting industry? It seems that you go on a lot of pods and lots of live. What do
Mm.
you see behind podcasting as a content channel and medium?
So I think podcasting can be very effective. I mean, it's just like anything else. When so many people start having podcasts, sometimes it can be harder to break through the noise. So it takes persistence. But I do think that I really like, in particular, the audio format. I think video can be effective, but I really like audio because of how it frees you to live your life while consuming content. I don't know if you do this, but I'm always listening to podcasts when I'm shopping and working out and doing stuff and commuting. And like, I really like that aspect. And I think so much of it is about authentic, honest conversations. Like, the reason I agreed to come onto your podcast is I watched some of your replays and I could see you just kept it real all the time. And to me, that's what people hunger for, because so many people are like, oh, we got to produce this amazing podcast. Well, I got news for you. Creating super entertaining, narrative driven podcasts is unbelievably challenging and expensive. But you know what's a lot more doable is having honest, expert conversations around a particular subject, and you keep doing it and doing it. When I started podcasting in 2007, I taped it over phone lines using a Zoom recorder tied into a speakerphone. But I just thought the medium was cool, because it was like, for example, when you and I sat down, I had no idea what you were going to ask me. And I think listeners really appreciate that, because there's so much over scripted, over marketed content. So I really like it, but I think, like anything else, you have to create the ability to subscribe wherever you are: Spotify, Apple, whatever, RSS, make it easy for people, and then I think it'll work.
Right. And in your niche, in the enterprise land, you get a lot of corporatism and people putting on some mask and going around with their corporate rah-rah. So how do you
Yeah.
avoid that? I saw that you had some debate format on the podcast. How do you get people to be authentic on a podcast call?
Well, if I know they're not going to keep it real, they don't get an invite to begin with. Um, but so much of it is basically like, there's a certain threshold, right? Of, you want to have a certain kind of streaming and audio reliability that you have to achieve. But beyond that, it's not so much technical bells and whistles. I mean, yeah, I could have an even better web, camera setup than I do and stuff. I spent more money on audio than video. But the point is, like, get people on and just tell them, like, no scripted questions, those are out, here's our topics, let's go. And also, there's live interactive aspects are cool too. So when I do like live shit, I like the audience participates on equal footing. Like, I bring them into the conversation, and that makes them feel like we're accessible and accountable to their questions and points of view. And that is radically different than how most enterprise media is produced. Most enterprise media still that our competition produces is like, oh, we're going to edit this video and put it through 20 or 30 revisions, and everyone's got to approve it. And you know what? By the time a bunch of people approve content, that content is lukewarm, overmarketed crud. And that's not going to work. And so what I keep telling people, and all your CEOs I think can benefit from what you're doing, which is they need to become media producers and figure out how to put out this type of content. But the catch is, they also need your skill set now. Like, it used to be, and here's another failure I'm going to admit to you. I used to believe that all you had to do was create awesome content, and the world would come to you. And that doesn't work anymore. I used to call it if you build it, they will come. And now that doesn't work. So now you need to create that really good content, but then you need all the skills that you've developed around how you package that content, promote that content, get subscribers onto that content, and build audiences around that content. And you know what? If you do that, selling whatever it is you're selling gets a hell of a lot easier. Otherwise, you're stuck in branded bullshit and trying to advertise in the zero sum game of advertising in a distracted economy.
I love that. Where can people find out more about you, Jon?
Well, wherever they want. Find me on LinkedIn. Find me on X. I'm JONERP on X. Of course, Diginomica. I'm always putting out content there. And feel free to ping me, man. I'm always happy to have these conversations, and I'm always fascinated to get different points of view on how to make this work. So I'm really glad you reached out.